Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We are on location in St. Augustine, Florida with Hazel Henderson. Hazel is an internationally renowned evolutionary economist, futurist, thinker, founder of and CEO of Ethical Markets. She has probably done more to advance the idea of a renewably based economy, a solar age economy, than anyone certainly that I know, and arguably that anyone knows. So it's really an honor and a pleasure to be seated with her here in her living room talking about this most important subject as we're looking at a world that has in front of us climate change. We have global warming, and there is evidence of its effects every single day. And Hazel and A Better World and others are doing what we can to mitigate, to modify, and not only that on that side, but also to advance a whole other agenda that can literally transform our planet for the good, both in the body of the planet, you could say, and the way we interact with Mother Earth, as well as the way we carry on our business day by day, and, what can I say, the health of our own body, mind, and soul in the process. So, Hazel, wonderful to see you again.
Thank you for having me, Mitchell.
Absolutely.
I really enjoy this,
Absolutely.
And basically, that whole agenda that you just laid out on climate change, cleaning up the planet, cleaning
Yes.
up the way we do business, shifting from fossil fuel in old industrial methods
Old systems.
to renewable energy. That is the mission statement of Ethical Markets Media. And
Big surprise.
All right.
Right.
Our elevator pitch is
Yes.
basically that our mission is to help accelerate the global transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy and what I call the solar age. In other words, all those solar technologies that are driven by the free photons that we get from the sun, which is our mother star, and that drives the wind energy and all of the other processes on the planet. So I wrote a book back in 1981 called The Politics of the Solar Age, and we are still in the middle of that politics. I thought, my gosh, surely it would be over by now, But
we all thought
still,
by the year 2000 there would have been major transformation,
right, but we're
but
still
in
in the middle of
fact,
it,
the
And-
entrenchment of the old ways is powerful
Yes.
and rigid.
Yes, it
And
really
this is what we're facing.
Yes.
But tell me, because you're interacting through Ethical Markets and through your own being known, having worked for the Office of Science and Technology with the United States government, having been advisors to presidents and heads of state in different countries, what do you feel is, pardon the expression, the temperature that you're taking when you interview and speak with these gentlemen and people?
Well, they mostly are gentlemen,
Let's hope so. Hope they're gentlemen. I mean.
At least we know, yeah. Basically, there really is a shift going on, and I'm old enough to have experienced that shift. And when I started out as an activist in New York City in the 1960s, doing a group called Citizens for Clean Air, no one knew what the word pollution meant. And
basically, you were a Brit relocated to New York, and you were appalled by the air pollution.
Air pollution.
Right? Yeah.
And it, just like it was in
Such a
London at
beautiful
the time, absolutely, you knew it was a killer.
Yeah.
And basically, there was no environmental protection agency. There was,
No legislation.
No legislation, nothing. And so when I look at the evolution of everything that's happened, the environmental movement, all of the legislation, even though we've got this terrible man Pruitt now, who's heading up the EPA and hoping to dismember it, but there has been an enormous amount of change. And we're fighting, I think the fossil fuel industries are fighting the last rearguard action now. and you've got the fossil fuel producing countries, you know, the OPEC members, and you've got Tillerson, now our Secretary of State, who is
Former
formerly
CEO of Exxon.
And you've got Putin, and Russia is totally an oil economy, and
Oil and gas.
they're all kind of closing, you know, the wagons and fighting the last battle. So it's getting pretty intense out there. You know, some friends of mine who started a non-profit law firm called Client Earth,
yes. I love
they
that.
are actually suing in behalf of future generations those companies who the major oil and gas and coal companies who have produced all of the CO2 in the atmosphere today. And there's now scientific studies that can actually apportion out how much each company is responsible
liable for.
And they're
which is a remarkable
they're saying,
form
okay,
of mathematics.
pay the bills. You know, this is what you owe, and this should go into the climate mitigation funds of the United Nations that they're putting together at COP 23 that just took place in Bonn, and so this is a whole new level. And it really reflects my lifelong interest in what's wrong with economics. I mean, how did we get into this mess? Well, we got into this mess because companies were allowed to, quote, externalize from their balance sheets all those social and environmental costs like pollution that they didn't want to account for, and they wanted to pass on to taxpayers.
So penalties, for instance, once the Clean Air and once the Clean Water Act were enacted, and then the EPA was constructed. By the way, and we have Nixon to thank for that, interestingly.
Oh, interesting enough,
so
yes.
that was the Republican agenda to have an EPA. Now look at what we've got. Now they're dismantling. The same party is dismantling
but
the EPA.
As you were saying when we were talking recently, and you know, I'm so happy to have you down here again.
Thank you.
That basically, you know, this whole thing has sort of now been emerging, so that the more that President Trump took us out, tried to withdraw us from the climate agreement, which you can't get out of for at least a year. So now we're just bystanders, we don't have anything to say. And so the G20 that recently met in Europe, they now call themselves the G19. And so the US is no longer part of the club. So all the rest of them, led by China, are going ahead. China's now the leading exporter, as you know, of solar panels, of wind generators, and electric cars. They are grabbing the global market for all of these technologies, and the US isn't even in the game anymore.
Well, we are in the game, but it's not being led by government. It's being led by the entrepreneurs, the green entrepreneurs, eco-entrepreneurs who understand where the future is. But I also want to make a point, since you mentioned Bonn and the withdrawal by Trump from the Paris Agreement, is that very steadfast group of politicians, governors and mayors from across the country who have a new, moniker, which is "We're still here."
We're still in.
And we're still in, yes.
And we're part of that coalition.
Fantastic. And the whole idea is interesting because it says that there's a distinction between what the President of the United States says and what the rest of us say. And he does not speak for everybody. In fact, he speaks for a very tiny minority known as the 1%. Well, despite what his group, his followers may think.
Even though the some 35% of the people who voted for him, basically he is not serving them well, because going to these poor people like in the Appalachian region and say, I'm going to bring back coal, and you're going to get these coal jobs back. Come on, you know, there's already, you know, 10 times as many jobs in solar and renewables, you know.
Exactly.
And so
It's
everything...
not economically sensible.
No, you can't. I mean, it's just like trying to bring back the buggy whip industry. I mean, you know...
Jobs.
Doesn't make any
But
sense.
Hazel, I would like to pick up on this note of exactly the distinction between rebuilding coal as an industry and building renewable as what is the economic case, the business case for going green, so to speak, for being a renewably based economy.
Well,
This is what you've
gets
been
back
up to
yes,
forever.
this gets back to our 7,000 volume library, which I call the What's Wrong with Economics Library. And you see, none of this would ever have happened if we'd had the correct economics. If we had had an economics based on nature that really understood that natural resources were incredibly valuable, pure air, clean water, you know, biodiversity, natural systems that underlie everything.
Economy as a biological system.
Yes, the plankton that are in the ocean that are the basis of our food supply, everything. If we had had from the beginning an economics that understood actually the conditions under which we live, and had valued...
by which we live.
Yes. And
because of which we live.
yes, and if they had valued, if that economics back in the 18th century had valued natural resources properly, then we would have steered a course toward green energy quite naturally. We never would have dug in the ground to try to find energy when all they had to do is to look up and see the free photons.
I see a photon coming at me now.
I see the photons coming from the sun, you know.
But no, I appreciate what you're saying.
And all we had to
Had
do...
it been based on an ecosystem mentality, a
yes,
biological
there
mentality.
wouldn't have been such a thing as externalities. There wouldn't have been this idea that, okay, we can pollute everything and tear up the planet and throw the stuff away. There's no away in nature, you know.
Right.
We could do that and...
nature is a zero waste machine,
that's
if you
right.
will.
And so, we can make profits in the short run, and we'll hide all of these costs in the environment or pass them on to future generations or give them to taxpayers or whatever. See, that never would have happened. And the interesting thing, this is something I've been discovering quite recently in the last few years, that we really misunderstood Charles Darwin. And I got together with a group of scientists. We have a project called the Darwin Project. And that was saying, well, how is it that Wall Streeters, even today, are always talking about the survival of the fittest and that nature's red in tooth and claw and all of this and rip the face off the client, you know the way they talk behind the shear the sheep, you know, that's the small investors and all of that. And this is a total misunderstanding of Charles Darwin. He never said any of those things, and he never used the phrase the survival of the fittest. That was coined by the editor of The Economist at the time, The Economist magazine. At the time, about 200 years ago. And so basically we totally got off on the wrong foot, and what Darwin was actually saying was that natural selection worked in a completely different kind of way. Species co-evolved within the environment, and as environments change...
and co-evolving.
Yes, and continuing, and we're all co-evolving together, including humans. And he thought that the human genius and what had made us so successful all over the planet, we are a global species, despite what Steve Bannon says, we are a global species. We've always been a global species, you know. Basically that our genius was cooperation, sharing, and the ability he thought was growing, and that we would evolve as a species toward altruism and empathy. And that's what I believe about Charles Darwin, you know.
And in fact, as we were speaking the other day, Hazel, this is further corroborated by neuropsychology and neuroscience, which shows that our survival is predicated on our ability to be social.
Yes.
And our, as you said, cooperation. And we
Yes.
are neurologically wired for that.
We have to.
We have to.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
We are
and all the way
completely
down
social
to
species.
love and oxytocin sharing and the building up of that hormone that has a group feel cohesive like
Absolutely.
a group
Yes.
or a family or a tribe or any kindred spirits.
Yes.
And also it goes all the way down to the micro level of a smile.
Yeah, this is the
And
next.
engaging someone with
Yes.
smile and laughter.
Yeah.
So humor, interestingly, becomes the real survival key and mechanism.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I mean,
Isn't it, when you really
so
unravel it?
our next evolutionary step,
Yeah.
really, is to take our ability to communicate and love and share in family and community, as we have developed, so we're now over 7 billion humans on this planet, we still haven't learned how to manage our affairs at these mega cities, of 20 billion people. Whether it's
20 million.
20 million people, whether it's Sao Paulo or Shanghai or whatever.
Tokyo.
This is what we have to learn now. And we have to take the ability to trust, which is absolutely basic to all social, glue, is the ability to trust each other, which we always did in face-to-face communities, and families and all that. And we are trying now to figure out how do we make trust scale so that we can manage ourselves, in cities or
Absolutely.
nations. And so this is the task before us. If you think of the page of the human agenda, which is open before us, our generation,
Mm-hmm.
it is how do we create these systems of trust at the larger level, international agreements like the climate change agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals that
Mhm, at the
195
UN.
countries have agreed is the proper way to go forward. No longer GDP, maximizing cash, which is what the GDP is all about, but these 17 goals, which are all holistic and
If you wouldn't mind,
penetrating.
explain GDP, and then I'd like you also to explain something you told me about last time I saw you, which involves the accounting of assets of oil companies that are still in the ground.
Oh yeah, right.
Because
right.
I
Okay.
want the audience to really get the monetary story and case for going green.
Yes.
That even without the brilliance of what you're saying about having an economy that mimics nature, i.e.
Yes.
biomimicry,
Yes.
or economy is biological system, that even on a dollar-to-dollar basis, having a green-based economy is way, way, way smarter and advantageous to our
Absolutely.
future
Absolutely.
sustainability.
And I think that the way we're going to get from here to there, from the fetishism of GDP and the fetishism
Just
of money.
Break that
which
down,
is-
GDP, for the
Yeah,
audience.
well, the GDP really is a cash flow account. It just adds up all of the production, mostly of goods that you can drop on your foot. And, it values chairs and tables and bullets and things more than it does services, and caring for people, at life's end and all of those, I think, were just as important, or taking care of nature.
It's mainly nouns, not
Yeah.
verbs.
Right, and so it's and if it isn't conducted in cash, it doesn't count. That's GDP, and so that's how it
Interesting.
almost steered us over the cliff, because we weren't looking at anything that couldn't be conducted in cash, and yet that there's so many things that money can't buy: happiness, caring, community,
Love.
evolving.
Can't buy me love.
No, evolving consciousness, you name it. And so basically we have now reached the point where 195 countries agreed that GDP is no longer the model that's going to steer
So
their...
powerful.
So powerful. They know it was steering us over the cliff. And so now they've got this holistic model of the what we call the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's completely holistic, and it's everything from clean oceans and better food supply, gender equality, diversity, good work, decent work, saving the
Safe
forests.
work environments.
Yeah, saving the forest, you know.
The earth herself has a voice,
right, and
just as with the Constitution
right.
in Ecuador.
And eliminating poverty and everything else. We can do all of those things now because we have a new steering mechanism, no longer GDP. And so we are now at this kind of very interesting inflection point where suddenly we sort of realize that money isn't wealth. Okay, money is actually
So important to point.
It's just information. It's just a tracking and scoring
Energy,
system.
information, right.
Yeah, it's a tracking system and a scoring system, that's all. It is, the real, it tracks and scores the real resources and the real talents of human beings in organizing those resources. And
It's the quantification of the qualifications,
yes,
or of the qualities.
Yes, right. And so now what we have is that we've lost trust very largely in what we call fiat currencies. This is the money that most countries
Fake
operate.
currencies.
Well, yeah.
Non-based.
It's the money that most countries
Faith-based
still
currencies.
operate under. All
Not
of the central
gold.
banks, it's called fiat currency. That simply means that if you trust the government that issues that currency, okay, you'll trust that currency, you'll put it in the bank and you use it for exchange. But more and more people are sort of saying, well, I don't know, you know, there's all of this debt, you know, and we have these flash crashes and these terrible financial crises, and there's something very, very wrong with our banking system. We don't really trust it. We saw what happened with Wells Fargo, you know, and all of these kinds of things, and that's why we have the Consumer Product Safety Commission that was set up after Dodd-Frank, and so on and so forth. And so people now
After
are
Glass-Steagall, by the way, was rescinded
yes. And so people
Mr. Clinton.
now, more and more, they've been doing this for decades, I've been tracking this for decades, they invent local currencies. And whether it's Ithaca hours, which were invented in Ithaca, or whether it's the Berkshires that the Schumacher Society invented, all over the world, I have used these local currencies as an indicator of how bad the macroeconomy was being managed from the central bank of that country.
Absolutely. It's a
And
symptom of how poorly those are doing.
Right. So the next symptom we can all see now is the invention of these these cryptocurrencies like
Correct.
Bitcoin, you see. And this is basically a huge bubble. Bitcoin has absolutely no value. It can't be used for anything except basically, you know, it's the greater fool theory. And there is one currency which we partner with.
You mean there's a sucker born every minute?
Yeah, sucker born every minute. And it's because they're afraid they don't trust the fiat
system.
government currency. But,
And with good reason, by the way.
yeah.
And there's no gold to be seen except for in China well, it was Libya.
But there is this Bitcoin, and now what we realize is that the way they use computer power and fossil electricity to mine these Bitcoins, you know, you have to solve these equations to get your Bitcoins, that they use the equivalent of fossil electricity and CO2 emissions of an entire country the size of Ecuador, 23 terawatts of wasted energy and pollution, creating this stupid currency, which is just pure speculation. So I always like to do the market-based antidote. And so that is a currency called solar coin. And it's a reward currency. And it rewards...
It's not one that you can spend, it's one that's awarded to those
to you.
countries or regions.
Individuals.
Or people.
Individuals. If you can prove that you have successfully captured photons from the sun and turned them into solar energy with the rooftop panels that you have or whatever, you can claim your solar coins. So solar coins now are in over 25 countries, and they are recognized now by the UN. And this currency is 100% backed, and more valuably than gold, because it's backed by solar kilowatt hours of electricity.
Totally measurable
Totally measurable.
value.
And there's no...
Even gold is a peculiar measurement of value.
Yes.
Because it's actual
you
use.
and you can't eat it.
You can't eat it.
Whereas
it's
electricity,
very
you can
questionable.
you can use the electricity, you know.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
what we
Unless you're going to make a lot of gold objects, you know,
Right,
jewelry. I mean,
yeah.
can you imagine tons
So-
of jewelry?
So what we do at Ethical Markets is always try to find where is there a disruptive new technology, a green technology, whether it's solar, wind, energy efficiency, or whatever, that can substitute for the polluting technology that's going on today. And so that's why we partner with Solar Coin. And we're always trying to find ways like we've been partnering with this.
What I would like to do, because we're out of time,
Right.
is to pick up on this if you are available, and we will do a part 2 and
Okay.
continue this conversation.
Okay, I'd be happy
That
to
would
do
be
that.
Delightful. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. What an education from Hazel Henderson. Mwah. This is the kind of education we need in schools, elementary schools, to learn about proper relationship to our environment and our economy. Thanks so much for joining us. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, for A Better World. Please contact me at mjr@abetterworld.net. I love to get your feedback and your comments. Stay tuned, and we'll see Hazel Henderson again next week.